Good morning, everyone. This is a big moment for me, not just because I'm standing here at Microsoft Ignite together with all of you, but also because you, the community, has taken your time to be here. And for that, I promise you, you will be rewarded. And since I've heard that you get better evaluations if you have a lot of demos, we are now 20 seconds in, and let's do a demo. So, WVD. I'll log on with my account. And of course, conditional access, MFA. I think you have heard that you should enable that. The network actually works. Good. Go. And I'm logging onto the service now, and I'll tell you more about the actual service in just a few minutes. But from here, I'll be doing most of my demos. I would like to just give you a little bit of background. My management plane is running in the US. My VMs are running in Amsterdam, in Western Europe. And my config manager server, which I will be using soon, is running at home in Linköping in Sweden, just so you get a picture of how distributed my infrastructure is. So we'll start my config manager console. And you will see that I now get a question to authenticate once more. And I'll tell you why in just a second. You are not required to do this, but I'll let you in on the details later in this session. So that's my config manager server going up. And meanwhile, I'll also start my desktop. And I'll also explain why I get two prompts, but it's pretty easy to understand once you get a hang of how Windows Virtual Desktop works. Because I'm now authenticating to a different set of servers than where my applications were running. Great. And the one portal to rule them all, at least until MEM is released, the Azure portal. So that was the first demo. And we'll get back to the slides. So imagine that, how many of you are car people that likes cars? Yeah, plenty of you. So imagine that you were expecting the car you always had dreamt about, the car you always have wanted. And you attended your favorite car show. And on the keynote stage at that car show, your car, the car you always wanted, was released. And it looked amazing. It promised to solve every problem in the world. And it pointed out a new direction for the car manufacturer. Well, that sounded great, but now you're here, you have this car available, and you started to feel like, is this really the car of choice? Is this really what I wanted? Do I need to relearn something, or do I need to get new skills to manage this car, to drive it, to take care of it? And how new is really this car? You know, like car manufacturers say, the new yada yada. But it's the old one with new paint. And I had the same feeling, because as you may have already understood, the car I'm talking about wasn't really a car. It was Windows Virtual Desktop. And Windows Virtual Desktop puts you into a choice. You have to choose which direction you want to go. And I promise to give you some of that information before you leave this room today. Because Windows Virtual Desktop is something completely new, just like the car. But it doesn't require you to relearn new skills necessarily. So when you walk away today, you will feel comfortable on how to get started with WVD. Because I'll also show you how easy it is to get going with it, and that it suits every organization on the planet, independent if you are one person or 100,000 people that will use it. I'll also explain the differences between Windows 10 multi-session and the operating systems we are used to. And lastly, this is a goal for myself, and I've, to this date, always been successful in achieving this. So I'm counting on you now. My goal is that when you leave this room, every single person in here will go out and at least give it a try, because it's really that easy to just try it. Then it's up to you if you need it or like it, but I hope that I'll give you the knowledge and the inspiration needed to actually go out and try this. And I'll start off by showing you what Windows Virtual Desktop is, how it works. I'll then go into how to manage it using Config Manager and Intune, or both, but also managing it using group policy. You have all the options available to you. Choose the tool you're familiar with, but they all come with some challenges and some limitations. And lastly, I'll challenge you as well, because Windows Virtual Desktop and really Windows 10 in general will challenge you to do things in a new way. And I challenge you to not get stuck in old ways of thinking about end-user computing and management of virtual machines, but to think in new ways and to put the user at the center. My name is Simon. I work for Chusek. I come from Linköping in Sweden, 2 hours south of Stockholm. We are famous for 2 things. We make chocolate and fighter jets. They are kind of related. I'm a speaker. I'm an author at Pluralsight. I do a lot of presentation skills coaching. I'm a certified trainer, and I absolutely love penguins. So my friend over here follows me around wherever I go, and he has the obvious name of Ping. So let's get going. Windows Virtual Desktop, democratizing end-user computing. How many of you are familiar with the abbreviation end-user computing? A few of you, or most of you. Good. End-user computing is all about publishing desktops, publishing apps to users from a central location to remote locations. There are a few different vendors that does this, but I feel and think that Windows Virtual Desktop in a completely new way democratizes EUC. And I'll explain later why. But that's something I'm really passionate about. It's not always I can stand on a stage and say that this could suit every single one of you in here. That also makes it extremely fun to work with, because I have to scale my way of thinking, my way of management, depending on who I meet. And now I'll give you an introduction to Windows Virtual Desktop, and I'll do it in the best way possible. Guess how? Yay, great. So, like I said, I'm using the web client now, the Html5 client. There are clients available for all the major operating systems. As many of you may know, Microsoft introduced or presented that they will have support for Linux in our very near future. And we already have native clients for Mac OS, iOS, Android, and Windows, of course. But I'm using the Html5 client. I've published my, and this haven't been rebranded yet, my Config Manager console, and I also have a desktop. One of the first things you need to remember is that we have the possibility to use multi-session Windows 10. And multi-session Windows 10 is Windows 10, but I'll explain the differences between this one and the regular one in a few minutes. But for your users, the experience is exactly the same as if they were using a regular Windows 10 machine. Another thing you need to remember is that it's multi-session. And many of you have probably already managed multi-session machines, but servers previously with different third-party vendors. Do remember that if you want to use Windows 10, Your users probably want to use the same applications that they're used to. So Teams, OneDrive, Office, things like that. We now have machine-wide installations for both Teams and OneDrive, and I encourage you to use those if you're thinking about using multi-session Windows 10. It's basically as easy to deploy them or install them as with anything else. But let's first of all show how I can prove to you that this actually is multi-session. So currently my FinNemo is logged on. And just to show you that I'm not fooling you, the host name of this virtual machine, BII-1. If I then move into my Azure console, I find the same virtual machine here. Connect. And this can, of course, be done with another user logging onto WVD as well. But I wanted to show you Bastion as well, so we do it in that way. If you haven't tried Bastion, I highly encourage you to do that. And if you have questions in regards to what it is, we have a bunch of Microsoft people that are happy to answer that. But I'm logged on to the same machine. Head back here. And as you can see, we're now 2 users on the same machine. And this machine I'm running, as you can see, it has all the important stuff like Cortana, Timeline, Edge. We have the store somewhere around here. It runs all the apps you're used to. And for a user, this is Windows 10. But you can be as many users as you like. As far as I'm aware, there are no official limitations. If you want to push in 100 users on one VM, do it. Try it. Because all VM sizes are available as WVD machines. Every single VM size you can find in Azure are available to you to use in the best way possible. And I previously spoke about how to manage it. How many of you know how to use group policy? How many of you are happy that you know how to use group policy? Yeah, a few of you. Group policy is something that really intrigues me, to be honest. It's a mind game to me to configure policies. But again, this is nothing new. It works just as always. So if you would like to use group policy to manage your machines, you're more than welcome to do that. I especially encourage you to do it currently if you want to configure things like FSLogix for profile management. And I would like to tell you something that many of the people I've met in the booth during this week don't know. If you have Windows licenses, you are entitled to use FSLogix for free. You have already purchased your licenses, but you can use FSLogix both for your virtualized environments, but also for your physical machines for profile management. And that's extremely useful if you have like shared machines that are physical in your environments. You'll get a much, much smoother profile management technology than most of you probably are using today. And like I showed you, this machine is running in Amsterdam, but I have a rather good experience, I would say. My config manager server here, which is a published app, connects to my server in Linköping, Sweden. And again, it works great. Even though the management plane currently is only available in the US, it will be rolled out to EMEA and APAC over the coming time. I have no timeline. Ask your Microsoft friends about that. But we will have the management plane in different parts of the world as well. But it works just fine today. It's great for evaluation, and especially if you are in the US, it's all done for you. But now when we're up and running, my machine here was running the gallery image available from the Azure portal. I have done nothing to this image, apart from installing the config manager agent on it. There will always be, I assume, ready-made images for you with with multi-session Windows 10 and Office Pro Plus, or without Office Pro Plus if you so desire, which I encourage you to get started with at least and see if that's something for you. We'll talk more about managing images later on, but there are images available, so it's not really a big step to get started. I usually tell my customers and the people I've met during this conference that once you have your identities in the cloud, and I'll give you the options for that later on as well, to get started with WVD, to set up a POC of it, from the first click to a published desktop, that's around 25 minutes. And I'm not kidding you now. That's the time you need to put down to actually be able to present a desktop or apps to your users. But once we are up and running, we need to take care of these machines. It's still a Windows machine. Even though it's running in Azure, it's a virtual one. All of these machines are running semi-annual channel, which means that you will be required to upgrade them as fast as you can, I would say. You have, of course, the same supportability as you have for your physical clients, but I encourage you to update it continuously. It's also about delivering new applications to your users, new settings, new features, and therefore we need something other than just the native image, in my opinion. If you're only using Office and perhaps the built-in Windows functionality, of course, you don't need to do that much with it. But for most of you, you will want to manage your WVD environments just like you manage your physical machines. And I'm passionate about Microsoft Intune. That's where I started off. As you could see previously, I'm a Microsoft MVP in Enterprise Mobility. But Intune currently, as I will show you later on, doesn't support Windows Virtual Desktop to the full extent. It works great if you're one user on one machine and that machine is your machine. But it's not supported in a multi-user session yet. And the reason for that is rather obvious. I've been standing on different stages. My friends and colleagues have been standing on different stages and asked you to move to a user-centric model, where the user is the object you're trying to service with applications and settings and so on. And if you think that, if you see this in front of you, you have one virtual machine where you push in like 100 users, which all has user-centric policies, user-centric compliance policies and so on, that will end up today a complete mess. But I'll show you how you can use it, because I'll also later tell you about my vision for WVD. So first and foremost, multi-session Windows 10. This is one of the really new things about WVD, that we now are able to, instead of using a server, use a client operating system which supports concurrent users. Like I said, there's no limitation to how many users you can fit into a single machine. It depends on your use case. It depends on which apps you want to use. And if you have been managing Windows servers previously, which are multi-session, you have a lot of experience on how to manage this as well. It's no big difference, really. But there are some vital differences in terms of how this operating system presents itself to management tools. So you shouldn't see it as just Windows 10 with multi-session. I'll show you how Config Manager, as an example, views and sees and interacts with multi-session later on. But take the parts that you have from managing Windows servers, combine that with the knowledge you have from managing Windows clients, and you're basically good to go after this session. The other thing you need to take into consideration is that this service is running on Azure. And I'm really excited about Microsoft announcing support for Azure Stack Hub as well. But in my case, my wife wouldn't allow me to bring a Azure Stack Hub into our house. I've just thrown out my rack cabinet, so she wouldn't really approve that. So I'm running on Azure. And if you take the way we are managing patching on physical machines today and apply that to Azure, it works. Some of you will probably use it in that way, like patch it like any machine. But remember that Azure isn't billed monthly, isn't billed even weekly or daily. It's billed by the second. So every single second your machines are running, waiting for patches to install, it's something you're paying for. Therefore, you may need to take new actions on how to manage patching on Azure. But it also depends, like I'll explain lastly in this session, on how much time you want to spend taking care of your machines, or how much you want to automate. And lastly, when WVD were announced about a year ago at this very conference, I first saw the obvious use case of Windows Autopilot. The challenge with that is that we don't have access to the hardware in Azure. We don't have access to UEFI. And that means that we need to take things like that into consideration. Autopilot won't work because we have no clue on seeing how should we get this VM up and running with the same hardware ID. What happens if a machine stops before it boots? Then we need a new machine. So these are considerations you need to think about. But now, let's look into Config Manager and Intune and see how that could help you drive continuous innovation on WVD. So in my Azure portal, I have a number of different machines. App02 is my distribution point. That's a regular config manager, distribution point, and management point. I have a domain controller, and then I have a bunch of machines. These are in 3 different host pools, groups of machines that have different purposes. The top ones are for publishing apps. The middle ones are the ones I'll be showing config manager with, and the bottom ones are the ones I'm using with Intune. You can build your host pools as you wish. The important part is which apps should be installed, and it's no problem to publish apps and desktops from the same host pool as long as you don't target them to the same user. So you can have apps and desktops running on the same VMs, but you can't publish those resources from the same host pool to one user. Then you need 2 host pools. Let's move back to my machine here and open up Software Center. Because as I see it, it's a benefit to do as little work as possible on your images. Do it as generic as you possibly can. That's my view on physical machines as well. Make it easy for you. One of the arguments I usually get for not doing it in that way and instead do it very personalized is that it takes time to install apps with Config Manager. And that's the biggest lie ever. Config Manager is a really powerful tool. It's just about how you use it. So now in my Software Center, I have my Config Manager console published, but I want 7-zip as well. It's a vital app, something everyone should have. I find my machine, right-click, install application. And this is really about servicing users on demand. You have a user that calls in and say, help, I need this application. Can you install it quickly on my virtual machine running in Azure? Yeah, of course I can. I select 7-zip, I click OK. I move back to my machine. And we should soon see 7-zip appear. This enables you to really do a streamlined image, but then service your users on demand, either by themselves or you push it out. That's quite fast. Was that 10 seconds to get that application out, and now the user can install it? The benefit of using Azure is also that you have a rather good connectivity between your virtual machines. So my distribution point and my VM probably have a throughput between them at 2.5 gigabit per second. So applications installed really quickly. That's also something to consider when you're using Office 365 services, since they're running in basically the same data center. You have a really good throughput, both to OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, whatever you like to use. But I also told you that there are some caveats with this. This is a Windows 10 machine, but this machine is not a workstation, the log says. User policy disabled on multi-user terminal server. That's not an error message you expected to see on a Windows 10 machine. The same thing applies if you set a requirement for Windows 10 on your apps. They won't appear, because this operating system is a bit of both. So by default, Config Manager won't evaluate user policies on multi-session machines. You can enable this in technical preview from 1910 and forward. That's a client setting. Enable user policy for multiple user sessions. That's now in technical preview for Config Manager, but you can enable it if you so desire. Do remember that that could impact performance if you have a lot of users on one single machine. So don't be surprised when you try to push apps out to your users on WVD and the apps don't appear. It's highly possible that you have a requirement on your apps, a requirement on your deployment types that disallow them from installing on Windows Server, or only allows them to install them on Windows 10. So think about how many users will you have on your virtual machines? Will you use user-centric or device-centric policies? And how does your requirements look for those machines? Another challenge that we could run into is that if we can do it in this actually. If I go to my settings app, how many of you are familiar with Microsoft Intune? Great. How many of you are using it? Even better. Usually, if I want to see which organization my device belongs to, I would go into Accounts and find information there. Now, this machine isn't joined to Microsoft Intune, but as you can see, it's a very limited Accounts tab here. My machines are doing a hybrid Azure AD join. They are supporting automatic MDM enrollment. That works just fine. You can manage them with Intune. Mind you, like I said previously, they need to be one user per machine. But then you don't have access to the settings and the information you usually find in the Accounts tab on Settings. Therefore, you still need to deploy the company portal, which I hope you are anyways. But do remember that you currently aren't able to join machines to Intune from this app. But other than that, it will just appear just as any machine. So if I change my tenant, oh, free Azure advice. Find my devices. These two machines are Intune managed. And there's nothing that really separates them from any other machine from an Intune perspective currently. I do see, though, that this will change. Intune is a core of the offering around operating system management for Microsoft, especially now with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So I do expect to see a lot of investments being made in the integration between Intune and WVD. But currently, there are some caveats. But if you are thinking of using WVD to provide a user with a dedicated Windows machine that only that user will be using, absolutely, you can use Intune, especially, which I'll get back to in just a few minutes, if you have been able to remove all your servers. If you don't have servers, you shouldn't be really setting up new ones just to be able to use an Azure service. To me, that's the wrong way of thinking. Because in the end, people and not technology will be the judge. I think you all feel that, especially if you're working in service desks and so on. People will tell you what they think about the technology you provide them with. I absolutely love to work with WVD. The product groups, the partners around it, the customers I'm working with are so passionate about what they do. And it's great to see that WVD, which is an Azure service, really integrates well with Microsoft 365. That's one of the best things about the entire technology, that I, for once, can work with both Azure and Microsoft 365 simultaneously. And now in this third part of my presentation, I'll share some considerations that will be important for you to have in mind when choosing how you build your infrastructure around WVD. We will talk about infrastructure, manageability, and ease of use. And we'll start in infrastructure and begin by looking at where are you today. How many in here have an IT infrastructure but no servers? You're cloud-born or all in the cloud. Yeah, great. One? Wonderful. Yeah, one. Yeah, like you can be proud of that. That's an achievement. And my vision for WVD from the start were just that. Organizations, small and large, shouldn't be required to set up new servers just to get on WVD. Therefore, the authentication pop-up I received when opening my Config Manager console and my desktop is one of the first things I left feedback on when starting off with WVD over a year ago now. Because the only real way today to get single sign-on is by using ADFS, which to me is a shame, actually. Because if I'm away from ADFS, I'm using password authentication, I'm using password hash, and I want to use WVD, I shouldn't be required to set up ADFS. If you are using ADFS, that's all good, but do think about it from this perspective. Will that pop-up be a blocker to roll it out? If you think so, then consider ADFS. If you are just fine with that pop-up, that authentication for your users, that will be the only authentication they really see when they sign on using the native clients, basically. If that's fine, don't set up ADFS, but wait for new ways of doing single sign-on. I know that the product groups are working on it, but do consider that. Is it okay to get a pop-up like that authenticating the user, or do you need to set up ADFS to create the best user experience? The other consideration is that you need identities. All of these machines that we have seen today, so far, are domain joined. That's a requirement. All your WVD virtual machines need to be joined to a domain. But there are different ways of doing it. First of all, you could use, if you don't have a domain controller in the cloud, you could use Azure AD domain services. That works just fine. It's basically domain controller as a service, which integrates with your Azure AD. That allows you to domain your machines, you can do group policy, and it works basically like any other domain controller. That's great if you don't have other virtual machines and want as little management as possible. If you want to decrease management, That's a hashtag, by the way. Use it. The other way to do it is, and if you still don't want VMs in the cloud, you can just set up a VPN connection or an express route to your local infrastructure, your on-premises domain, and authenticate over that connection. That will minimize the footprint in Azure, but you will then have single point of failure. If that network connection goes down, your machines won't be able to authenticate. Basic. And the last way, the way I've done it, is to have a domain controller in Azure, which my machines joins to. So it's up to you to see, okay, what do I have in Azure today? What do I want to invest in? And how highly available does this environment really need to be? So that's your 3 options in terms of identity. But also do consider what you want to reach. In my environment, I'm using the Config Manager console in the cloud, connecting down to my local server. That works fairly well with Config Manager, but all of your apps could have some challenges with that. So you need to consider latency from an Azure data center down to your own data center if you are thinking about keeping your data on-prem. And if that doesn't work, you should consider moving it to Azure. But that latency challenge is something we always need to be considerate about, and that's regardless of which cloud or which solution we are using. But I actually see Windows Virtual Desktop as a driver to move data to the cloud anyways. Like I said, you have a great experience when your data is that close to your machines. And that works for SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, or any other Azure-based file service. Imaging. You have a few different options there. Like I said, you have the gallery images, which to many of you will be a very good starting point. They are already done for you. You can get started straight away. You have the option to build your own images, just like you always have done, and upload them to Azure, and you can also service them in Azure. But again, and also the third option is to look into third-party tools that can help you manage your images for you and create those natively in Azure as well. But again, I challenge you to think in new ways. If you have a ready-made, fully patched Windows 10 multi-session made available to you from Microsoft, they'll update this image continuously, not when you have deployed it, but when you deploy new machines. It have Pro Plus installed on it. Why not use it? And then service it with applications, service it with settings, and add it to your domain. Instead of keep on using and managing and creating images. This is something that we have spoken about on our physical machines now for a couple of years with Autopilot and so on. I challenge you to do the same thing with your virtual machines. Manageability. And this is basically about weighing how much control you want and how much time you want to put down on it. You have 4 different options, really. You can take what you get from the store. You can basically use that image and just let the user themselves install applications on it. You can use Microsoft Intune, currently in that case where you have one machine dedicated to one user. But like I said, hopefully that will change. You can manage it by using images again, just like many of you that have managed like Citrix, VMware, Parallels, RDS environments. Usually we don't patch those images. We just create new VMs and move our users over to them. And that's absolutely possible as well. And the 4th option you have is, of course, Config Manager. That requires more infrastructure, but if you already are using Config Manager for your physical machines, take that into consideration as well. Furthest to your left would be the option where you have the least control. You do the least amount of management on it and save time and money from that perspective. The further away you move to your right, the more control you have, the more you can service your users. And it's all about being lazy, really. Ease of use, and not just for your users, but also for yourselves. Keep it simple. You don't want to have Windows Virtual Desktop driving up a lot of work for you. You want it to decrease, again, work. And a very good way of decreasing work for you is to use Azure Services. You have so many great features in Azure that really will help you managing WVD and will allow you to move away from managing each individual machine, but rather managing them from a cloud perspective. So instead of using like a lot of firewall rules and so on, use network security groups. Instead of using a domain controller in the cloud, use Azure Domain Services. You have a bunch of settings in Azure networking that will help you a lot. Use Azure File Services for your profile management. In the end, perhaps you don't even need any additional infrastructure, but are just consuming services. And now you're wondering why I have a cupcake ATM on screen. This is actually one of my favorite pictures, because the picture service I'm using, if you search for automation, this is the first picture that appears. So this is your goal, basically. With Azure, when you have all your machines in one place, with all those amazing capabilities we have in Azure, you have all the possibilities in the world to build a fully automated Windows Virtual Desktop environment. Managing imaging, managing scale-out, managing application deployment, managing profile services, all of this, either with Azure Services alone or supported by the services you already are used to using, like Config Manager. Before I summarize, I think I have time for one question, and I'll be here later on for the rest of the day, of course. Yeah, one question.
So your comment about wanting to be able to use user management versus machine management, you
Yeah.
have to have the machine has to be dedicated to the user. You just mean the WVD is dedicated to the user, not the underlying Azure host, right?
No, you're just managing the WVD virtual machines. So the question were, do you manage the underlying Azure hosts for it? And no, you don't. You only manage the actual virtual machines.
So if I have a developer that logs in the same machine all the time,
you can
target him as a user to manage as opposed to managing the machine level.
Yeah, you could do that as well. You just need to take into consideration that that may impact performance.
Yeah, understood. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Again, you're more than welcome to come up afterwards and ask me any question you like. I'll be here for the rest of the day. I'm not done yet. Wait. Before I summarize, I said. Have you been listening? Windows Virtual Desktop is new, but not really new. I usually tell my customers that the two really new things is multi-session Windows 10 and the actual service. But it's still Windows. It's still RDP. It's still the infrastructure you are used to manage. So take that with you, that you can get started with management of this without needing to relearn or retrain in a number of ways. Think about manageability. Because users will have the same expectations on these virtual machines as they do on your physical machines. And you now have more options than ever in really creating that great user experience. And again, remember that I challenged you today. See how much management you really need. Don't view your VMs as something you need to necessarily lock down and be really cautious about. You can create a secure, user-friendly, and easy-to-manage infrastructure by using WVD. So ensure that whatever management tool you use, that you are able to use it to do good things. And I encourage you to go out and try it. Like I said, the investment you need to make is about 25 minutes of your time to get started. I'm happy to show you how. So go out and try it. It's the best way to learn. So when you leave here, sign up for an Azure trial subscription if you like. That's well enough to get started, and try it. And this is a game changer to me. Windows Virtual Desktop will bring desktop and application virtualization to anyone, regardless of where you are. And to me, that's really about empowering every single person and organization on the planet to achieve more. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of Ignite, and please remember to evaluate my session.